Hello, everybody. Welcome, welcome. It's lovely to have you here. Welcome to this very exciting event, webinar, panel. We're here. We're excited to talk to you. For those of you that don't know, Elect Her is a non-partisan organisation, and it works to motivate, support, and equip women in all their diversity to stand for political office in Britain. And it's all about ensuring that as many different types of women can achieve political office, but also kind of the tools and support that you need to undertake that political journey. And that's really what we're going to be talking about a lot today in our panel. We have an amazing group of disabled women here who kind of have different experiences of getting a bit political. And we're going to explore those experiences and learn kind of what that journey has been like, whether it's campaigning, whether it's ending up sitting in the same room as Michael Gove, or ending up actually as an elected official. A little bit about me. I'm Dr. Amy Kavanagh. I am a blind activist, content creator, and freelancer. I'm usually supported by guide dog Ava, who currently, I believe, is fast asleep. There you go. You might just have like a fluffy, large, fluffy mass kind of a view here, fast asleep. So that's me. You might know me as @blondehistorian on Twitter. And I'm quite a politically minded person, but the lovely team at Elect Her always say that I'm basically their target market, in that I'm a politically minded, interested individual, but I haven't taken that kind of journey towards formal political office yet. I know they are continuing to try to persuade me. So do feel free to say hello in the chat if that is accessible to you. Tell us, who you are, where you're from, whatever you feel comfortable with. Maybe what you're excited about today. That would be great. I'm in West London at the moment, and we've had a big old hailstorm. I don't know what the weather's been like with everyone else, but that's pretty intense. So I am going to now introduce our lovely, lovely panelists. And just so people know, for a bit of housekeeping, as everyone is here, hopefully we do have our BSL interpreters. We have Sarah and Nikki. They will be rotating around kind of every 15, 20 minutes. And we do have captions available. They are auto captions. If you need any more information about how to kind of access that, let us know. The team will certainly be available in the chat to help. I'm going to do a little audio description of myself. I'm Amy. I'm a white blonde plus size woman. I'm sat in my home office, and I've got shelves behind me, and it's got all sorts of different things on it. I've got a dinosaur handbag. I've got little figurines for gaming and books. So I've got all sorts of different bits behind me. And I've got I think I got described by a colleague the other day. My headset makes me look like a pink cyborg, apparently. So that's what I look like. I am going to hand over to our first panelist, Eleanor, to introduce herself and tell us all about who Eleanor is and kind of a little bit of your story and the work that you're currently doing. Over to Eleanor.
Hello, good evening. My name is Eleanor Lisney, pronounced she, her. I wear many hats, although tonight I am not wearing one. I am an East Asian, for a bit of description. I've got quite short hair at the moment. I'm wearing glasses. I've got quite a cluttered background. I'm trying to sort of hide my untidy wardrobe, and I've got pictures of insects and plants and Frida Kahlo at the back and a Paddington bear. I co-founded Sisters of Freedom, which is a collective of disabled women, and Cultural Access, which is, well, obviously, to get access into the culture, which is based in Greenwich. But also, I'm not going to name everything. This is not a sort of CV, but I'm very proud to be intersectional and say things like just got onto the board of directors of EVR, which stands for End Violence and Racism Against East and Southeast Asian Communities, which is a long one. But only saying that because to say that I'm quite intersectional in my way into being an activist. I wouldn't say that I'm into a sort of straight politics like what Amy said, although I have been asked. I am an activist and a campaigner. I prefer to be behind the scenes and to be a supporter rather than be in the actual sort of political things. I mean, local and sort of national politics. I'm going to finish the fact of saying that I've been to the UN a couple of times, so I suppose that's sort of international. And I'm going to stop there. If that's all right, Amy.
That's perfect. Thank you, Eleanor. That was a really good introduction. Thank you. I am going to hand over to Sarah next.
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Rennie. I am a white woman. I've got short blonde hair, a grey scruffy polo neck jumper, a very boring background compared to everybody else, just plain white with a canvas of a snowy scene in the background, and my signature red lipstick. Always red lipstick. It's lovely to see you all. So I'm a disabled woman. I use a wheelchair, and so my day job is I'm an accessibility consultant. I'm freelance. I mainly work in transport. Outside of work, I'm very, very much interested in disability rights and the rights of disabled women. And I credit that to Eleanor Lisney for getting me on my journey many years ago. And Eleanor pushed me to Geneva a few years ago to speak. And that was a big stepping stone in building my confidence. The other thing outside work that I'm doing politically at the moment, which is taking up all my time, is I'm co-founder of a group called CLADAG, and we advocate for disabled people who are caught up in the building safety scandal. So you will be aware of the cladding crisis and the risks that people are under in high-rise buildings. So it's disabled people that we're particularly advocating for. That's me.
Thank you very much, Sarah. I'm going to pass over to Emma.
Thank you very much. Hello, hi everyone. I am Emma Roddick. I'm the SNP MSP for the Highlands and Islands, and I'm in Inverness at the moment. I'm a white, most would say peely wally brunette woman, 24 years old, and just now I'm wearing a blue top that probably should have gone in the wash 2 speeches ago, and I'm sitting in front of a print of some very colourful Highland cows. I am a disabled woman, and like many, I had a crash course in activism and advocacy when I had to try and get adjustments and medical treatment for myself. So I am also a disability activist by force. I've had a lot of that life experience that older politicians insist that I collect. I've been homeless, I've had big health problems, and I've suffered through a job in the NHS. Campaigning on mental health and other things as a school kid got me kind of accidentally involved in party politics. I was quickly shoved into this local office bearer role, and I've been a member ever since. I was elected to the Parliament last May, and I might as well be saying I was elected last week for however long it feels. But I'm now a member of the Social Justice and Social Security Committee in the Scottish Parliament, where I get to scrutinise a lot of legislation, including disability benefits and homelessness prevention.
Thank you, Emma. That was great. So that's kind of a little bit of everyone's background and the stuff that they're interested in. I'm going to follow up now with a few kind of more specific conversations for each person. But, you know, if anyone has any strong feelings or wants to chip in, let us know. And do in the audience, if you have particular questions that come up for our panelists, you can submit them using the Q&A function, or you can pop them in the chat. And when we get to our Q&A, we can bring those up. And if that's not accessible, we will have the opportunity for you to raise your hand and come in and voice or sign your question towards the end. So I'm going to go back to Eleanor. And really, I think it's important to say for this whole kind of discussion is that everyone is kind of in a different stage of being kind of politically active and a political journey. And obviously Emma is an elected official, but Eleanor has really kind of, I think Sarah tried to hype up Eleanor a little bit, but Eleanor kind of massively undersold herself there in her intro, because Eleanor, you're one of the founding members of, and a co-director, in fact, of Sisters of Freda. I would love you to tell us a bit more about the amazing work that Sisters of Freda has done over the years and kind of why you established it. What was the impulse and what was the decision between you and other activists about why Sisters of Freda was needed?
Yeah. I would like, I actually didn't say this, but I am actually a co-founder of DIPAC as well. And that sort of got me started into disability politics, if you want to call that, very much so. The reason why Sisters of Freda started, because we got invited, or I got invited by Million Women Rise to talk about disabled women and domestic violence at Trafalgar Square. That was a bit scary, but we did it. I dragged a friend, Michelle Daly, to go with me. And then I sort of realized that there was a huge gap between disabled people, organizations, women's organizations in disabled women's issues, not just domestic violence, not just violence against women, but all sorts of things like sexuality, like health issues and stuff. And so I got few disabled women campaigners that I know and say, hey, should we start something? We took a long time because there is no precedent to follow. How do you start something like that? So sort of like it was a learning process as we went along, and we right from the start we decided to be intersectional, because as a group of women, most of us were either Europeans. Most of us were not white. It just so happens that we realized that, it was important to bring those the sort of other so-called protected characteristics, although at that time the term didn't exist, into the whole part of politics. So that's how it started. And then we got involved.
Eleanor, can I ask
Sorry?
what year that was?
That was in 2010.
2010.
And it went on to 2012, but we didn't actually get really officially Sisters of Freedom until 2014, because we decided to be a community interest company. We didn't want to be a charity, but I won't go into all that. But because we were involved not only with disabled people's organizations and women's organizations, so as the only sort of disabled women's collective or cooperative, as we call ourselves at that time, we got pulled on and into sort of core groups with women organizations. And so we ended up going to Geneva for things like CEDAW, if anybody knows it. It's the Commission for Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And then, you know, and then there's the CRPD and the CSW. It's a long list of these things that we have to learn very quickly. And I think that either you call it slowed down, or it was a good thing that we had to learn from women's organizations as well as disabled disability sort of rights. And I would say it's not easy, because they don't always go together, and there's sometimes conflict between the two, because women's organizations don't always understand accessibility, and disabled people don't understand. Some disabled men don't understand why we needed to have a disabled women's, an organization. And I was asked that. I was asked if I was not being this divisive by doing this. And I was told there's no gender in disability politics. What do you say to that? But anyway, so you can say successful, it's good, but in the end, we're still not funded. We're still a bunch of volunteers who do what we can, and it's great that we do the work we do, because it's all done by volunteers. And I'm happy to answer more questions, but I think that
that's a really good introduction to kind of what you do and why you felt that need was there, as well as some of those barriers you've kind of come up against. You mentioned kind of intersectionality, and I know this is a really core and important value for you, Eleanor, but also for Sisters of Freedom. Can you tell us a little bit more about why intersectionality is so important, and why it is perhaps something people going on that journey towards a political career, not necessarily elected office, but a politically minded career, why it's important that people consider intersectionality?
Well, because we don't exist in silos. I'm not just a disabled person, I'm a disabled woman. I'm not just a disabled woman, I'm a disabled woman of East Asian origin. And especially during the pandemic, there was a huge rise of hate crime against people of Southeast and Southeast Asian communities. And, that has to be considered. And also, just for me, myself, I'm sure there are other people as well. I'm immigrant, and I'm a child of immigrants. I've been in places where I don't speak the language, where people look down on you just by the fact of the color of your skin. I very quickly say that I've lived in France and in the United States, and I was born in Malaysia. So that gives you an idea of why intersectionality is important, is to realize, for example, this Sunday, I'm going on a protest. I haven't been on a protest for more than 2 years, so I'm not sure how I'm going to cope with that. But it is important, the realization that in this country, even if you were born in this country, even if you have the right papers, this country, the government can still say, you have no right to be a citizen. You know, it's those kind of issues that we have to consider all together, and that's why intersectionality is important. You know, yeah. It is like, you know, whether if you're a mother or if you're a refugee, you know, I won't go on. I'm sure you get the message.
Always, Eleanor, such a powerful speaker about this issue. Sometimes I wish when I was trying to explain intersectionality, I wish I could like Star Trek beam you in to tell them about it, because you do it so well. Thank you very much, Eleanor. One quick question. Why the name Sisters of Frida?
Well, you can see the picture of Frida Kahlo behind me. When we were trying to decide on a name, and I think that took us a long time, we wanted a role model, but one that wouldn't stigmatize people, because there are a lot of people who don't like being labeled disabled, if you like. At that time of our journey, we thought we want somebody who kind of like symbolizes everything. Frida Kahlo is an activist and a campaigner. She is bisexual. You know, she is all sorts of wonderful things. She's a creative person, and can I say she's non-white? I don't know what else to say. She, you know, so for us, she's sort of like, yeah, a role model in which we can follow. And yeah.
I like that. That's great. Thank you, Eleanor. I'm going to move over to a few specific questions for Sarah before we open up the wider discussion. So Sarah, you didn't start out life as a disability activist. You used to be a property litigation lawyer. But you left and you set up your own disability consultancy company. Kind of what spurred this action and this change for you? Because I think for a lot of people, those career changes and that kind of leap towards, you know, activism or a political career or a political journey can feel a bit kind of like a leap too far. So I'd love to hear from you what kind of spurred that on and why.
What was I thinking? What was I thinking? I was really proud of my, you know, my first career, and I worked really hard to get there. And it stood me in good stead in a lot of ways in terms of reading legislation and not being intimidated by documents and jargon and rubbish, because that's what lawyers normally talk.
It's also why Sarah reads all my contracts for me.
But yeah, I loved my career, but really and sadly, the culture of commercial and corporate law is not really conducive, or certainly wasn't at the time, to being disabled and needing adjustments. I struggled for a long time. Things like being sent to 15-hour meetings in another city. I can't stand or walk, so I couldn't go to the toilet if there wasn't a changing places, which there invariably isn't. And it was just making me ill. No job is worth making you ill. And I thought, right, okay, what can I do that will give me agency and over my health and body, but also be valuable? And I thought, well, I do know the law, but I'm disabled and I use services all the time. So can I put that all together? And I did the best I could. And I'm really, I totally acknowledge the fact that I saved hard to give myself a few months of mortgage payments to enable me to make that leap. And, you know, but I thankfully I haven't looked back since, and it's been over 10 years now. And there's a really interesting crossover between working in an area as a freelancer you really enjoy. I'm sure Eleanor, I know, and Amy, you will relate to this, where you also do stuff unpaid in that world because you see value in it and you for your community. So navigating that is a little bit of a challenge sometimes, that grey area. But I mainly work in transport now, and then in my personal life, obviously. Unfortunately, CLADAG became something I had to sort out as best I could and do what I could.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. I mean, obviously, many of us will be aware of what happened at Grenfell and what a harrowing part of our history that has been, and how it's still, there are these inquiries and reviews, and, the lives lost due to negligence is something that we continue to talk about. But one thing that's quite shocking that maybe people aren't aware of is that 40% of the people who died in that fire were disabled. And you've been working really hard ever since Grenfell for disabled people, old people, and leaseholders who are in unsafe housing. So can you tell us a bit about CLADAG, the Leaseholder and Disability Action Group that you've created?
So it was me and Georgie who set up, Christmas last year. Georgie and I have never met, still in person. She lives in Manchester, I live in Birmingham. We have very different access needs. She's also a wheelchair user, but she's non-verbal in the sense she couldn't take part in a meeting like this. And so between us, we are each other's access needs as well. We support each other. And it came about for me as a leaseholder living on the 13th floor of a high-rise building that I got a £53,000 bill for, just like everybody else, for the shoddy workmanship. But it dawned on us that there were additional ways disabled people were impacted. So, for example, evacuation. The lift that was meant to be a firefighting lift that I could use in the event of an evacuation. Oh, turns out the constructors of this building didn't bother doing it properly and it can't be used in a fire. So I was trapped. Like people all over the city, I'm looking out the window now and I just see tower blocks everywhere. I think of all the disabled people living in them. And so we started thinking about that. And then we were thinking about, well, hang on, £53,000 bill. Disabled people are structurally prevented from accumulating wealth, because of the cap on care costs, because of benefits caps. We don't have these kind of savings. So that's how we got into that. And then it just uncovered more and more. And the more we read about Grenfell, the more we read about evacuation and the ableism that is rife in fire and building safety. It's mainly white non-disabled men who call the shots and are totally ignorant of the lives we lead. And so we got involved, and we've been trying to do during the consultation in the summer, myth-busting blogs to challenge opinions, influence MPs and peers on the new building safety bill to make sure disabled people are included. And a couple of weeks ago, we decided to sue the Home Secretary. So, yeah, why not?
I love how you do that. It's just like a really casual mic drop. Just like, anyway, so we just decided to sue the Home Secretary.
What else, eh?
What else? What else can we do? It's like, and I think that's what's really interesting for me about your journey is that it's gone from an issue that has personally affected you in your life. This is a need that you directly have. This is a bill that landed on your doorstep. And you've taken that journey all the way to suing the Home Secretary. And I kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about what is it like to find yourself suddenly in those spaces, those kind of decision-making spaces, and how kind of equipped were you for those moments where you had to talk to MPs or peers?
Well, thanks to people like Eleanor, I had a good few years of learning to advocate for myself and my disabled community. I didn't, and I think my previous job, I wasn't intimidated so much by the rubbish. However, what I felt very deeply and almost traumatically was the aggressive hostility of the building and fire safety industry. They do not want change. And the language of my existence being unreasonable. Comparing getting me out of a fire could be holding up, getting other people out. There was a whole argument about me being on a stairwell and how that could be an obstacle for everyone else. It was those things that traumatized me the most. And that's what I found, even in Home Office meetings of 50 people. And I've been the only disabled person, or me and Georgie. And we're both sitting there horrified. And nobody's intervened and said, that's not okay. And I think that's the thing I find the hardest, is when people don't just have your back in those spaces and say, this conversation needs to stop, the tone is wrong. And as disabled women, that can feel very intimidating. So the legislative side of things, I can deal with that.
Yeah.
I found that hard.
Thank you. Yeah, it sounds extremely difficult to deal with. Good thing for suing them. We're going to talk a little bit more about Sarah's work in campaigning, but next I want to talk to Emma. Because you are the elected official among us. And I wanted to ask you, you've given us a bit of a clue about what you were doing prior to becoming an MSP, but it would be great to hear sort of at what point in your career or what moment did you go, right, I'm going for it. I want to be a politician. This is the career I want. What was that kind of aha, this is the goal moment?
I honestly think I didn't get that moment of thinking I wanted to be an MSP until I heard my name being called at the count and I had to make an acceptance speech. Because although I've always been interested in campaigning, I've always been interested in politics, I've always had opinions, I really do struggle with imposter syndrome. And I'm very good in hindsight. I can always, talk about something that's happened to me and go, well, actually that was wrong and that guy was out of order. But in that moment, when you're sitting in a committee room or you're reading that email and you're being told that you're just bad at this and you don't have anything to offer, it can be really hard to just not believe that. So I don't think I've ever got to the point of just having that clarity of, yeah, I want to be an MSP and I'm good at it, and just never, falling back from that.
Talking about that imposter syndrome, I think that's something as women and marginalized people is something that people experience a lot. When did you kind of decide that national government was the level, that you wanted to go for? What, was it, okay, I want to go for elected office, but it's going to be national government rather than local or party level? Why was that kind of your decision?
Well, again, until the election came about, it was my plan to stand for council again. I was a councillor elected in a by-election in 2019, and the plan was, like most disabled people, I think it's a lot harder to get kind of integrated into the party enough to win a popular vote and win this election, because you can't travel the country in the same way, you can't meet as many people. And it's also hard when the structures that are in place and the people who are holding office in those structures really don't want you there. So it was more of a, I'm going to go for this because I know that I have something to offer, and I know that I could do it better than some of the other people who are standing. But I didn't expect to win, and I know that's something that everybody says, but I really didn't. I thought I was going to be standing for council again, and I think that's probably part of the reason why I still was not thinking, okay, so I need to plan for going to Edinburgh now, until the point where I had to accept that was happening. And I keep saying, I've only been in this role 9 months, and I get to do a lot of amazing things. The committee work is going to be an absolute highlight of my life, no matter what happens after this. Working on scrutinising legislation on the things that have affected me my whole life, and knowing that I'm one of the few people in the room who can actually consistently offer that experience is such an honour to be able to do. But 9 months in, I'm already planning on writing a book in 2026 about how terrible it can be, and the barriers that are still very much there.
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think when people think about elected office, committee work is not the thing that jumps out at them, that they think is going to be like the awesome opportunity. Like, I'm going to really enjoy those clauses.
Yeah, no, I'm a nerd.
I know, I'm into it. I'm the kind of person that has UK Parliament TV on in the background when I'm doing work. I'm like, oh, good, legislative scrutiny committee. We'll watch a bit of that. I mean, this is a big question, but what is the difference you want to make at this level of politics? Do you have a particular goal or a vision or a legislative change or something that is really what you want to achieve, but beyond the excellent committee nerdery?
Yeah, I struggle with this because I have so many, and I know people are supposed to have that one law that they want to make, but I've got about 20. And I think, for me at the moment, considering what we're talking about in the Social Justice, Social Security Committee, in Scotland at the moment, we're taking over personal independence payments. And for me, having been through that process and the process of reassessment, and having that moment of fear when they send me a letter, even if it turns out that letter is to say that I'm getting a tenner for Christmas, it's something that I really, really want to improve. And it's a real benefit, I think, that this session, we actually have managed to elect a few disabled MSPs. I would love for there to be more, because the difference that those 3 or 4 people make to my everyday life is massive and just cannot be overstated. But we're lucky that we have a few people. There's a few of us in that committee who at the beginning declared that we are on personal independence payment, and I don't think that's happened before. And that's the thing that at the moment, we're taking it over, and it has to be like for like. The UK government's told us you can't change the eligibility criteria at this point. It has to be basically what we are offering, but offered by you. But in the next few years, I'd really love to reconsider some of the eligibility criteria, the 20-metre rule for starters, and expand how we understand particularly mental illness, but also fatigue. Things like that, I think, could be massively improved in the new system if we can just dig away at it.
Perfect. Thank you, Emma. I think that sounds like an excellent ambition and makes me want to move to Scotland. This is kind of a question to Eleanor and Sarah. I mean, Eleanor has already hinted that you have been asked before about political office. I mean, considering the huge impact that both of you have had as campaigners, as activists, as people in the disability rights movement, do either of you have ambitions to become an elected politician? Is it something you would even consider? This isn't your stump speech, don't worry. It's, is it something that you would think about for the future? I'll ask Eleanor first, because I think she has been asked before to do it.
Yeah, but I'm not sure it was a joke or or not, because I don't know if I'll ever make it to any list. First of all, I know Sarah has been very kind and say all those things, but something I realized working with Sister Safrida is that without people like Sarah and others who are there, I don't dare to name them, is that we are, as you said, we're a collective and we work together. And, we help with writing a letter to Maria, what's her name?
Miller, the killer.
Yes. And Sarah drafted the thing, and there was criminal, I can't remember. Sarah, you would remember better than me because I've got terrible memory.
It was a domestic violence bill.
Yeah. And disabled people were left out. There was a loophole. They said if you were disabled, they can effectively sort of we didn't count when it comes to being protected. So I'll let Sarah go on about that a bit more later on. But I wouldn't consider it because of my own, I have chronic fatigue things. So I don't even know how well I would, how well I would exist sort of like day to day sometimes, because some days I can work perfectly and other days I spend more than half the day in bed kind of thing. So one of the sort of barriers, I'm a wheelchair user apart from being having chronic fatigue, you know, and those are the sort of barriers, if you're talking about barriers for disabled people, is what kind of impairment do you have? And I don't even mean just impairment about whether you can get into the House of Parliament, because I have been several times, and you have to go through all these various lifts, and you know, and you get totally lost if you weren't guided, kind of thing. So now I wouldn't consider, well, that's the House of Commons. When it comes to local politics, that's even worse. In Greenwich Council, virtually you can't even get in. You know, that's just a fact. So, you know, in terms of access and barriers of all sorts of things, I hope I haven't lost the question, is that I wouldn't consider it because I just don't see how I can be effective given what I have, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I think for me, there's two parts to your answer there. And yes, there are, you know, the physically getting in the building part and the having impairment needs. But also what I'm hearing you saying, Eleanor, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you believe that you're making a difference where you already are. And I think a lot of us would agree with that. And actually, it's about weighing up, you know, would my energies best be spent in my collective, in my community as an activist, or fighting the system to get into political office? It's kind of like there's two sides of that barrier there. Is that a fair representation?
I think you're very right there, Amy. I just don't, you know, whenever anybody goes into disability politics or any disability rights or anything like that, I always say, you know, look at what you have and then make your plans from there. And in that case, I would say, you know, have I got the energy to do this? You know, have I got the ability to do that? You know, you talk about reading contracts. I do read a lot of documents, but it goes in one ear and it comes out the other ear. You know, that would be, you know, no good if I was, you know, seriously, I'll never be a lawyer, you know, but there are other things that I can do. And so that's why I say you are right. You have to consider your own strong points and go from there. But that's not a muddle kind of answer.
No, it makes complete sense to me. Sarah, are you ready to take over the world as president, or?
No, but I'm just thinking about what Eleanor was saying. I look around a lot of my disabled female friends, and we're freelance for a reason.
Yeah.
Because we've been able to craft and shape a world that is accessible to us. And so and sadly, and I don't want to put anyone off because I don't know, I've never done it, but I can only speak about my well, I think for a lot of us, resourcefulness and going, what can I do? What's the most impact I can have with this energy, these tools, these skills, and these experiences? So again, for me personally at the moment, I'm very much in a space where this is something I feel passionate about, and I'm putting all my energy into this single issue. And I really respect people that are able, you know, like Emma, to do a wide range of issues. But I also look at, I'm watching the TV and I look at your traditional politician, the images that we see of running up the steps into a building to go and shake hands with somebody, pass me your baby to kiss and I'll drop it. Hold a baby.
I mean, that might have to be the quote. Might have to be the quote of the seminar.
But also, genuinely, if you look at wider issues like a factory that is closing down locally, and it's a huge issue in our community, I can't get in the community, I can't get in the factory to go and talk to them. And so I think, and I don't want that to put anyone off, but I'm just speaking from my personal perception of my fears and my anxieties around that role of being out there in a community that's not always accessible, often not. So yes, I would never say never. For me, I'm sticking to the single issue that I can craft a world around.
I think it's interesting that both of your reflections are talking about it as if it's it feels like almost an impossible obstacle. But my follow-up to that is that both Sarah and Eleanor have been in political spaces. You've been, if we can quote Hamilton, you've been in the room where it happens, and you have sat down and broken bread with the decision makers. And Sarah very honestly reflected about how hostile a space that can be. And Eleanor reflected about how quickly you can suddenly find yourself in that space if you're a voice that people want to listen to. Can we talk about that a little bit? So for people perhaps who are maybe at your stage of a journey where they either have a community issue, a campaign that they feel very passionately about, a petition, and they want to take it into that political arena. They want to have those conversations with decision makers to affect change. Kind of what would you advise? Like, what routes are there? Kind of what are your tips for getting in that space? And I suppose I'm going to ask Emma first, because Emma, the actual technical ins and outs of how, if I'm Amy and I'm very, very passionate about, I don't know, my local swimming pool staying open, how do I take that journey into a political space?
I think it's such a hard question to answer, because not every local representative is going to react to you in the same way. Not every local representative is going to be open to listening to our voices, and I've got colleagues who are not open to listening to my voice, and I represent thousands and thousands of people. So it's really hard to give one clear piece of advice on this, but I would say, in my job, I interact a lot with disability organizations. I organize, a lot of meetings with other MSPs and people with lived experience. So, going the third sector route is definitely an option. Going through groups like the one that Eleanor has set up, that might provide a stronger voice that's harder for representatives to ignore. But I would also always just tell people to get in touch with their representative. The worst that can happen is they're going to ignore you, and then you can tell people that they've ignored you, and folk don't like to hear that.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I'm also going to put in my 2 pence, because I used to work in policy in the third sector, and this is something I feel like, and probably Emma's going to hate me for saying this, but there's a bit of a secret that you can actually email any representative if it's a national issue, right? If it's a constituency issue, if it's I'm annoyed at my neighbour's fence, but if you join part of a campaign about pavement parking or accessible toilets, and you watch a debate where an MP is really passionate and you think they support those ideas, contact them. Because yes, they can ignore you and say, please go to your local representative. But I put up a video on Twitter about dockless bikes, about me, it's a blind person walking into dockless bikes. And a Cambridge MP saw it because he had 10-minute rule motion on dockless bikes in the House of Commons. And he quoted me. He's not my MP, but because it was a national issue and he cared about it, I got in touch with him. So you can do that. You can be sneaky. Sarah and Eleanor, what are your kind of tips for being in those spaces, whether they are hostile or welcoming to you as a campaigner? I'm going to ask Sarah first.
I found that just generally one of the biggest things that helped me in this journey was having allies who know the technical stuff that I didn't know. I had the lived experience, but I didn't have the technical. And that was what I felt like the aggressors were using against me. So it was surprising. Sad, isn't it? It was amazing, actually, that there were so many non-disabled people who for 10 years had been fighting this, and I had no idea. They were fighting for issues that I was living with. And actually, they were chuffed to bits to find me because I could be the lived experience part of the puzzle. So they were able to feed the knowledge to me, coach me on the technical stuff, and shove me into the room. So they were almost like helping me with that. And that was a really, really useful thing in a very technical area, because I don't know much about fire safety and regulations and all that. So that was a huge help, and taking comfort in that and having people willing to stand next to you and back you up and say, enough now, go and take a break. I'll go fight this. Usually man who is not being very pleasant. And so that was really helpful. The other challenge with the area we've been working on is it's a highly triggering and traumatic issue for a lot of disabled people, and I haven't been able to ask and lean on people who have been personally traumatized by it. It's not fair. So it has been a little bit isolating to do it, but having non-disabled allies has helped, and I've really lent into that. But I was just thinking when we were talking before about barriers and things we can do, and I've been looking in the chat, and people have been talking about, for example, the using Zoom, and that's really leveled the playing field, because before Eleanor talked about fatigue, which is my issue as well. The thought of sacrificing my couple of hours of work to go to London and meet Michael Gove, fabulous as that is, it's a huge ask on our bodies and on our time. But if I can go, yeah, all right, Mr. Gove, I've got an hour, let's jump on, let's do this. It's kind of leveled the playing field. Now, obviously, that's not for everyone, and it's not for my colleague Georgie, for whom Zoom is not accessible. But it has given us a few more options to level the playing field. So I'm hoping that things might be a little bit easier for us by having that more flexibility, rather than being summoned 3 o'clock to Portcullis House in London. And you've got to come from Manchester or wherever and make it in your own speed at your own cost. It gives us a little bit more options to get our face and our voice in the room.
Thank you, Sarah. Any other kind of tips around engaging in those political spaces, Eleanor?
Yeah, when Sarah was talking, I was just thinking, like, for example, today I was on a phone call with a friend who's desperate because her flat is unlivable at the moment, and she's having a fight with her landlady. And she said, I want to find a pro bono lawyer. I said, that's a very long route to go to. You need a solution. So I was suggesting that she goes and sit in her counselor's office or whatever. So he's got to deal with it. You pay your taxes. You've got a right to demand that he helps you. And she said, but what can a counselor do? I said, he can only ignore you. You've just got to go and find the person in the council. But that's the same sort of thing, and it's more effective if you're near elections. And I don't know what Emma says, but I've had 2 councillors come to me and want to talk to me because local elections are coming up, and then I sort of bend their ear about all the sorts of things, including, pavements that are broken, and those pavements and shared crossing or shared spaces and stuff like that. So we don't have any in Greenwich, and so, you know, that isn't on. You've got to do something about this. What are you doing for disabled people in the community? And that is my tip, is that it's very often timing, you know, and get at them when it matters to them. And even if it doesn't matter to them, if you go and consistently sit in your counselor's office or wherever, surgery, they've got to do something about it. You know, it's just, you know, knowing your rights.
Yeah, and I think that's really the key thing, isn't it? And I know at Elect Her, they're preparing a lot of resources about these rights, you know, about the right that actually lots of people don't know what our rights are around government, that you have a public right of access to the process of government. You know, you can sit and watch government in process. You have a right of access to go and sit in public committees. You even have a public right of access to certain groups and events. My secret weapon is all party parliamentary groups. That's kind of where I say to people to look, because they're always desperate to invite speakers for those. Sarah, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I think it's worth acknowledging. God, I agree with you, Amy. But we've got a question in the Q&A about the fact that council chambers is upstairs.
Yeah.
And so for somebody who's a wheelchair user unable to go up those stairs, those spaces can still be really inaccessible.
Yeah.
And that's frustrating.
It is really frustrating. I've got one final question before we go to that wider Q&A. And I kind of want to ask each of you, who is doing it really well? If I'm in this audience and I want a role model or an organization that I want to go and study, listen to, research, get top tips from, who do you think is doing it really well for getting disabled women's issues or being a disabled woman and role model in these spaces? Who do you think is doing it really well, or which organizations are enabling in the most positive way? I'm going to ask Emma first.
I think most of my references and people here are going to be incredibly Scottish, so they might be not very helpful for a lot of people here, but certainly in my work, I find that Citizens Advice Scotland are very, very helpful, and they've taken massive strides from even when I spoke to them. It must have been back in 2015 as a political staffer, to make their organisation far more inclusive and disability aware. In terms of people, my absolute hero at the moment is a political opponent of mine, Pam Duncan Glancy, who is the first wheelchair user to be elected to the Scottish Parliament. She's a fantastic person, a good friend, and I think her presence in the Parliament, it certainly changes my experience of the Parliament, but it is going to change the decisions of the Parliament as well, I think.
Thank you. Sarah, who are you admiring? Who do you think is someone interesting to follow and listen to?
Well, as a youngster, I was a little bit inexperienced. I've said it before, I do credit Sisters of Freedom with giving me opportunities, and Eleanor would say, and the rest of the team, Sarah, Women of the World want someone to speak on toilets. Why don't you go and do it? Me? What? And that, it was stuff like that really cut my teeth, and so that's something I would consider people to have a look at. In terms of people, I have a lot of time for Fleur Perry, who is currently, she's just crowdfunded for a judicial review claim against the lifting of restrictions and the impact on disabled people. But most importantly for me, throughout the pandemic, she fought hard to get clarification on NHS guidance for clinically vulnerable people. And I also really look up to Natalia Dow as well as a deaf activist. Her information she shares and the fight she goes through on access to work. So those are two disabled and deaf women that I have a lot of time for.
Thank you, Sarah. And Eleanor, which organisations and individuals inspire you, empower you, or do you think other people should be aware of?
For women, disabled women, not that many organizations. You mean in the UK?
Yeah, ideally in the UK, I would say.
Right, because I have also been influenced by Americans and Canadians. Sarah mentioned Fleur. I have great admiration for Fleur. I've actually met Fleur, had tea with her in the house, etc. She's a lovely person, and she inspires me in all sorts of ways. And yeah, so she's already been mentioned. I'm in awe because she's so young as well. Although she wouldn't say that. But compared to me, she's, I feel like a dinosaur. Then I'm not actually met our disabled, not properly, our disabled MPs, and I don't have a lot to do with them. So, I don't really know. But the one person that sort of really I go to advice from is Jenny Hurst, who's an independent living coordinator for one of the DPOs in London. And she's great. She knows everything, I think, to know about independent living and all sorts of advice and stuff. I go to her, and she's always been very supportive and helpful when when I need it. And I think, Jenny is brilliant for that. She herself said, I'm only a one horse person, or whatever she means by that, because her specialty is independent living. But I think that for a disabled woman, that is the one thing. For disabled people, that is the one thing that is extremely important, and it is knowing your rights, knowing how to manage independent living. So yeah, I would go for Jenny and Fleur, but then Sarah's already mentioned Fleur.
That's perfect. What a great list and suggestion of ideas for our audience to go and look up and learn. And I would definitely say that top tip of equipping yourself with your rights and understanding your rights and crowdsourcing that knowledge as well. It's a really good idea. I'm going to open up the Q&A. I'm going to elect her colleagues to help find and read them in the chat, because I'm blind and hosting this plus reading questions is challenging for impairment reasons. I don't know if Sarah or Eleanor have spotted any in the chat, or anything that they wanted to immediately address. So if not, I'm going to ask Hannah to help me moderate.
I'd love to. I'll start with a question that's in the Q&A to get us started, and then I'll lift them from the chat box. One participant has asked, is it reasonable if council chambers are upstairs but you use a wheelchair? There is a seat stair lift, but I can't take my chair upstairs. To ask to change the meeting venue from the old-fashioned house with chambers upstairs. Most councillors are white males over 60, and it's always been this way.
I mean, legally, you have the right to ask them to change the location. It's a reasonable adjustment, and you can throw the Equality Act at them. Whether they'll actually do it or not is the next part. But yes, you absolutely have the right to ask them to meet you at an accessible location. I don't know if Sarah or Eleanor or Emma have anything to add to that.
I've had a very similar experience actually, and yeah, I would just back up what you've said there, that it is a reasonable adjustment, and it should change if you require it to change. But where I am, the Highland Council, we have a city kind of chambers for Inverness councillors, as well as the main headquarters for the whole of the council. The Inverness Town Hall has some disability issues. The chairs are kind of old style, that in keeping with the, let's say, the tone of the place itself. And I had real difficulty sitting in them, and especially sitting in them from 9 in the morning till 6 at night. So I asked for another chair to be moved in. Apparently that would have destroyed a listed building. So they offered to get me a new chair in the council headquarters, where I don't have a problem sitting. So yeah, absolutely, it's an uphill battle, and it's not necessarily the case that they're going to do what they legally should be doing, but definitely ask. It's a fight I had to let go because COVID happened, so I've not actually been back there for 2 years, but it's certainly one that I hope somebody picks up.
Thank you. Any other responses to that one? Any tips for making people move meeting rooms?
Just a quick one. I won't mention which organization or whatever. They were going to launch something and it wasn't accessible. And I raised that, and overnight they changed the venue. I was incredible because it must have cost them a pretty sum to change the venue, but I think they recognize that they couldn't launch themselves properly as a respectable organization, party, dare I say, if they weren't accessible. and having raised that made a difference.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think that's a good point. Don't be frightened to ask for it, because you have a right to ask for it. It can be a really scary, intimidating thing to ask for, but you absolutely have the right to ask for it. And I'm a big fan of the power of the CC email line. Copy in people to get records of stuff, copy in your representative, copy in, Google who is in charge of accessibility in that council, copy everyone in. And my ultimate go-to, again, not everyone's comfortable with this. If they won't do it, tweet about it.
I'm going to bring in the next question that came from Margaret earlier, about whether MPs or MSPs are using Zoom as an opportunity to give disabled people access to have more conversations with their representatives.
Emma?
It completely depends on the representative. I think people assume that you're told how to run a surgery and given a list of places to do it, but some people choose not to have them at all. At the moment, I'm kind of trying to change the way I do it, because I just don't think there are many people at all that I'm going to be at this hall from 11 till 1 actually works for. So I've started advertising the locality that I'm going to be in on a particular day and seeing who gets in touch and what their needs are. So off the back of who gets in touch, it might be a Zoom surgery, it might be one in a hall, it might be one in a hall and then some phone calls afterwards. So I think, again, it's about getting in touch and telling people that it doesn't work, because so many just assume that because it's been done this way for as long as we can remember, that's the right way to do it, and it's just not.
Thank you.
I think also, that you were talking about, Emma, about that tradition and the physical buildings and the traditions of the practices. It's so unhelpful, and we've seen this with women who are MPs and are breastfeeding and that. But I think about, didn't Baroness Campbell have a fight so that her PA could be in the chamber with her?
Yeah.
And these are nonsense things. I think the things that I struggle with, it's one thing if you're elected and you feel like you've got an authority to be in a space, so you can ask for it. But for somebody who just simply wants to listen to what's being said, and perhaps feeling, I'm not quite sure if I'm ready to speak or raise my hand, I just want to listen, it's a lot harder to ask for a whole room and 50 people to be moved with all attention on you, that part I find quite difficult as an outsider to navigate.
Yeah, I agree.
Can I also add that, I mentioned that earlier on, that you have to be ready that if it did happen, you have to go and attend, because because you can't ask for the whole venue to be changed and then nobody disabled turns up, kind of thing, I mean, by rights, they should do it anyway, but it's better if you actually also make it.
But I think that actually speaks to a really good point, Eleanor, because I think, yeah, when you ask people to change things, turn up is if you can, if it meets your needs to do so. But kind of feeding into what Sarah was saying, if you feel intimidated by that space, try and find other people, like try and find those allies to kind of take with you to kind of bolster your confidence, and whether those are disabled or non-disabled people, somebody who can just kind of uplift you and empower you in that moment to assert your rights, I think is always, if you have that person, obviously.
Can I also say it's kind of important, because a few of us might have that experience, but I also know when I first started, and you go into the sort of networking meetings, if you're in a wheelchair, you find that nobody wants to talk to you because you're a disabled woman. So there can't be any benefit talking to you, right? Who wants to network with you? That kind of experience is the same for when you go into a room full of, whether they're disabled or non-disabled, and you're not feeling very confident. And so the allies help in that case.
I will add, there's one exception to that though, Eleanor, that if you go, especially I find, to a parliamentary event, if you're the only disabled person in the room, you will have one person who comes up to you repeatedly, and that's the photographer. Because the photographer always really wants to get a picture of the disabled person at the event. And now, like, guide dog Ava is like a political secret weapon, because everyone wants to come up and pet the dog. And so now I very much have a like, I'll remove the harness and you can pet the dog if you listen to this issue. That's kind of my approach now. Sarah, you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about this issue about the guilt we seem to feel about not showing up after we've asked for a reasonable adjustment.
No,
what on earth is that about? And Fiona in the chat has said the same thing, fear of not attending. I think we need to come up with a FOMO for that. But actually, what's wrong here is that we are asking for a, quote, reasonable adjustment. The norm should have your basic access requirements. So anybody, town hall, should be able to participate as some very simple but commonly needed access needs. And the fact that we've got to ask for an adjustment from that is not okay. And we really need to start changing that go-to position.
Yeah. Takes confidence though, doesn't it? And strength and sometimes support to get to that position where we can, but that's why we're here, because, this is something we're trying to start here with Elect Her. We're trying to build this community of women that can say, oh, well, you didn't do it in Inverness, but, they did it in Ipswich, and here's an example, and here's how it worked, and here's how we achieved change. Emma, I'll let you come in quickly, and then I'll ask Hannah if we've got another question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that this is actually a conversation I've had a lot when I've been pointing out that, a particular event, whether it's party or parliament, is not accessible. And I say, like, this isn't wheelchair accessible. And the response is, well, there's nobody in a wheelchair here. Like, well, exactly.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? Is because it's not accessible to them, and it's which comes first. It has to be the adjustment, because if we are forcing people to overcome extra barriers every single time they want to participate, they're not going to participate.
Yeah. Hannah, another question for us.
Jen has asked in the question Q&A box, hi, I'm a police officer currently engaged in an employment tribunal with my employer. Whistleblowing and disability discrimination. Challenging these issues can be a lonely place. Is there anywhere external to the NHS who've been superb to go to get some support?
Oh, that is a really good question. Eleanor, you're a community activist. Where can people go to find community and solidarity?
Community. I don't know. I mean, in Greenwich, we do have a campaigning group. I'm a co-founder, Greenwich Depac, and it is campaigning, and we do try. We, if we need to, I suppose we would go to the councillors and try that. I'm not going to disclose anything because at the moment there is an issue that we're trying to get into, and it's a long fight, and it's a lonely fight. And even if actually it happens that we're a bunch of women, how do you get that? You enlist the help of journalists and all that, but even then they have limited resources because community newspapers are staffed of funds and people. So if you go back to the community, then we have to build up community resources, community places.
I think you made one really good point there, Eleanor, is that you have a local branch of what is a wider organisation. So I would say, are there condition specific, or, even if it's local Facebook groups, it's maybe doing that little bit of research to find out, where are there people like me who care about this stuff? Somebody has put join a union in the chat, I would advise. But it might be a little bit too far along that journey for that. I would say kind of have a think about what other community spaces are in your area, because you might be surprised about the different types of lived experience that are there. I know there are whistleblowing charities and organizations that have helplines, and they might be able to connect you with people who have lived experience, even if it's just someone who's gone through that process, to have a chat with them. That can make it feel a lot less lonely. If someone, even if it was a decade ago for a completely different sector, I know there are, and certainly unions will have whistleblowing advice, and you can often approach kind of their campaigning information side of a union without having to join it. I don't know if Emma or Sarah have any suggestions for this one.
Yeah, I was going to say join a union, but I think as well on the community side, we're rethinking at the moment what community means. I think all of us here are in a community in as much as there's a geographical location that we're all a member of, and it was probably quite a dark day for the establishment when we actually managed to get Zoom and everything mainstream, because now we can organize. Now it doesn't matter that all these barriers they put in place are still there, because we're talking to each other tonight.
Yeah, I agree. That's support. We are building community. You are part of something here tonight, and that is really powerful. Sarah, anything for this one? You are a lawyer, so maybe I should have gone to you first.
No, I was a horrible kind. I did horrible things. No, don't come to me for that. No, I've been really, I just think I thought I was really alone on stuff that I'm working on at the moment. But we are, the person that I speak to 10 times a day who is nonverbal, so we use WhatsApp and whatever we need to organise this whole campaign. It lives in Manchester and we've never met. This does, for those for whom it's accessible, we are without borders on this. And like Emma said, we can think a little bit more broadly about who our allies are and how we can add to each other and organise without going to the traditional meeting point round the corner at 7 o'clock on a Thursday. That's quite exciting.
I think that is exciting. A little quick question I'm going to pinch before we move on to our kind of closing comments, because I am aware of the time, but I think this is a really good one. There's a question about being a good ally, being a good non-disabled ally. And if I could have a quick comment from each of you on what it means to be a good non-disabled ally and where can people go for that journey? Eleanor, being a good non-disabled ally, how do people do that?
By not having assumptions, you know, and think for you what you can do, what you can't do, what they should do for you or what they shouldn't do for you, kind of thing. Just ask. I mean, you know, there's some stuff that's really crappy. My ex-boss used to say to me, and I get very cross. I love him. He's a lovely man, and he would say things like, "Oh, being with you is such an education. We're at a university," and I look at him and say, "Well, Phil, if it's such an education, you should pay me each time, you know, if you say that." But he never seems to understand what I'm saying. So, you know, being a good ally is not to sort of like feel for you or walk in your shoes or anything. It's just not to take any assumptions. I mean, that for me, it's being a good ally. I don't know what others would say about that.
Thank you, Eleanor. So we've got don't make assumptions, ask and listen. And the one that I always say, pay people. Sarah, what's being a good ally for you when you're a campaigner and a politically minded activist?
We've had some amazing non-disabled allies that have, we couldn't have got to where we are without them. But the things they've done, when I really reflect, are listened, really listened and asked us how we feel, valued our lived experience. When opportunities are there, they've said, you don't want to talk to us, you want to talk to these people. So sort of created opportunities and then stepped back and helped us with technical stuff where they've got the knowledge maybe in terms of their day jobs or whatever they've been able to offer. Just, I think it's very much about valuing the lived experience without making assumptions. And also having our back when people have been assholes. Sometimes saying, do you know what, Sarah, you're tired. You've had enough of all this rubbish today. We're going to go and have this argument for you. And that's been helpful in terms of our fatigue and energy and whatnot. And also just that solidarity. It's been really great.
Emma is back with us. Hannah, you had your hand up.
I just wanted to share that elect her, we've been asking that question for a while. And so we've been working with a wonderful woman in our community who is an inclusion trainer and a recently elected councillor. And we are designing a how to be an ally to disabled people training that we will make available to all the women in our community to help equip them be better leaders. So I don't have it to share at this stage, but everyone here will now be on our mailing list, and so in the next couple of months we'll have that available as a free self-led e-learning course within our platform.
Excellent. I'm gonna ask us all to kind of do our closing statements, just keep them brief, we're on the clock. So if there's kind of a final thought you would like to leave everybody with, just final words, I'm going to ask Emma first. What is your final message to everyone who's attended today?
I would say that, you know, I've talked about imposter syndrome already this evening, and I think it resonated a lot with people. So I'd like to focus on that and say that, you know, putting my own situation aside and what I think about myself, it makes such a difference when lived experience is in the room. And it makes such a difference when you have peers with lived experience in the room. So even if you don't manage to make one big change, if you are there, you are making a difference and you are disrupting in the best way the current political system.
Yes, disrupt the system, fight the power, into it. Eleanor, you love to fight the power. What are your final words?
Similar to Emma, so don't get discouraged. I know I sound like, you know, look at your where you are, what you've got, but when you're young, and I think I'm quite old. I am old. And when I was young, it was different. You know, I was full of energy and get go. And I think I'd like some of that back. Energy wise, chronic fatigue or otherwise, that is so important. As Emma said, being in the room. You know, when I went to Geneva, my first UN thing, I said I didn't need to say a word. All I need to do is be the woman there in the wheelchair, and that is powerful in itself. So yeah, I'm going to leave it at that. But you have to be there. You have to be there to have a voice, even if you don't speak.
Yeah, that's really, being there is disruption enough sometimes. Yeah. Sarah, your final closing thought for everybody today.
One thing I've learned, a mistake I've made, is getting swept up in being invited to meetings by very senior people, could be cabinet officers, and you think, oh gosh, isn't this? Yes, I must be there. I must rearrange my whole day, my whole life, because this is so powerful. Do you know what? Sometimes it's rubbish. You listen to, you witter on, you share your story that's really traumatic to you, and they listen and nod, and then nothing happens, and you see them in the House of Lords or Commons going, I've engaged extensively with people like Sarah. No, you haven't. No, you haven't. And that is my lesson I've learned. If it's useful to you, it's useful to your energy and your campaign, go for it. If it's not going to serve you, spend your energy doing something that is. And that is something I've really learned. Think really carefully about how you spend your time, and don't get swept up in any sort of nonsense like that. If it's useful, go for it. If not, say no thank you and do something else with your 1 hour of energy you've got.
Wise. Impairment management and smashing power. We like it. We're here for it. I think my kind of follow-up final remark is then to kind of tie these together. Your lived experience is really valuable. And so many people here will be empowered and inspired and encouraged by the lived realities of being a disabled person, a disabled woman. But remember, you don't owe it to anyone. You can use it as a campaigning tool. You can, use those stories and experiences to give your voice power, but you do not owe it to anyone that you don't feel comfortable sharing it with, whether that's an MP, whether it's a journalist, whether it's Michael Gove. You don't have to live your trauma to have a decision maker be convinced, because there are other ways of putting your case across. And I think very often in social justice, and especially when you're entering that political space, I used to go into these meetings a lot, and I used to see it time and time again that they would roll out the disabled person to tell a sad story, and you don't have to do that. So if you want to, and if you want to, as my mum says to me, talk about being groped on Radio 4 all the time, you do you, but you owe no one that. It's up to you and your choices about what you want to do. Look, I've made it on time, Hannah. I finished this on time, bang on time. I'm so proud. Yay. I'm going to hand over to Hannah to tell us what is next with Elect Her.
I want to say a massive thank you to all of you for joining us this evening. I just absolutely adore holding this space for our community, and it's a real honour and a pleasure to hear the voices of such fantastic women. It energises us so much to continue in our work. So a sincere thank you to all of you, and to our BSL interpreters, Sarah and Nikki. As ever, thank you so much for your vital work. We want you to stand for elected office. We need more women. Full stop. We need more underrepresented women, but of course we understand the nuance and the challenges, and it isn't for everybody. And I just sincerely hope that we can continue the conversation, and we can continue and support and champion more disabled women to move forward in our politics, so that council chambers are not upstairs. It's a pretty simple one, and we need more disruption. So thank you everybody for joining us this evening. Thank you very much to Eleanor, to Sarah, to Emma, to Amy for your time. I hope we'll get to see you again soon.
Thank you very much, everybody. Have a lovely evening. Go fight the power. We can do it. Bye, everybody.
Bye bye. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.